don't we get started, everybody, while people are coming into the room? I'm James Heimowitz. I'm the president of China Institute, and it's truly a delight to welcome our moderator, our panelists, and all of you that are joining us in the virtual audience. This promises to be a very, very interesting evening. For those of you that know China Institute, you know that we're always trying to bring really authentic voices to issues and ideas that are affecting us all. I'll start off with something that's very, very personal. I first went to China, more than 45 years ago, and China was a very, very strange and different place then. If we fast forward to now, in 2021, and we listen to what's going around, we may think that, China and the US are in a position of, how shall I say, not the best of friends. On some regards, that may be true. But one thing that's happening and that we feel very, very passionate about China Institute is the only way to move forward is to engage with each other and to collaborate where collaboration is appropriate. And I can't think of anything more appropriate to engage with each other than the topic that we're going to be exploring tonight. Regardless of what anybody's perspective is, political, anything else, economic, one thing's for sure, and that is China and the US share this planet. And we'll probably have the most consequential relationship based on the fact that we share this planet. And when we say we share the planet, there's lots of things that we can sort of intertwine and weave into that. But certainly nothing's more important than the physicality and the environment itself. So I just wanted to thank all of you for joining us. I don't want to take up too much time because we've got a lot to cover and we promise to be very respectful of your time. So I just wanted to say you're getting one of the wonders of going digital is we can have Jeff in the US here with Dinda, Alvin in Japan, Ma-Jun in Beijing, and get the best minds on this subject together and help us share their knowledge. So why don't I hand this over to my colleague Dinda to do a better introduction of our guest this evening and to kick off the program. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. Thanks, James. I just want to say that tonight's conversation on the US and China getting to zero is going to be a discussion of how both these countries are moving towards cutting greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050 and 2060, respectively, to hopefully help mankind avoid the worst impacts of climate change and meet the Paris Agreement's goal of keeping global temperature rise to no more than 1.5 centigrade by mid-century. This is an enormous task, obviously, and these two countries have a special role to play because as the two largest emitters, and at the same time, they're both the two largest emitters of greenhouse gases, and at the same time, the two countries with the most ability to transform our use of energy in our societies. So we are very, very lucky tonight to have some amazing speakers. Let me just jump right in with the introductions. Ma-Jun and his organization at IPA have been at the forefront of promoting pollution information transparency in China over the past decade plus. And they've been taking government and enterprise pollution information and making it available to everyone on their smartphones or laptops so that citizens and local government groups can monitor the pollution in their environment, and companies are held accountable for their environmental performance or lack thereof. This includes textile mills and electronic supplies for some of the biggest companies we buy from in the West, such as H&M, Apple, etc. And Ma-Jun is also now working on a carbon peak index, which he'll tell us about later tonight. But he's truly a pioneer in China, and so it's a thrill to have him tonight. Jeffrey Sachs is, of course, a professor at Columbia University and a leading economist on sustainable development, whose advice has helped the UN, many governments, and financial institutions to promote policies that lead to inclusive and sustainable growth, including the eradication of poverty, control of AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, and the battle against human-induced climate change. And finally, our moderator tonight, Alvin Lin, is an expert in his own right as well. Alvin is the Climate and Energy Policy Director at the NRDC's China program. And his writing and research is also very well known in China. So we are absolutely delighted to have all of you tonight. I will say just quickly, we will take questions at the end in the last 15, 20 minutes. So please, as you have questions, type them into the Q&A section. You'll see the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So type in your questions and we'll get to them. So over to you, Alvin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dinda, and thank you so much to our excellent guests here. We find ourselves in 2021 in a very different world, of course, from where we started a year ago. This pandemic has really brought home, I think, how much we need to work together, whether that's for public health or climate change, and that these solutions to these global issues are really things that we need to work together on. Despite the pandemic, I think we actually did make progress last year on addressing climate change. China's President Xi Jinping announced last September at the UN General Assembly, and quite a surprise to, I would say, 99% of China watchers, that China would seek to peak its carbon emissions before 2030 and seek to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, just 10 years after developed economies such as the EU and the US. He followed that up in December with more details on China's 2030 goals under the Paris Agreement, including that it would increase its share of non-fossil energy from 20% target by 2030 to 25%, and nearly more than double its wind and solar capacity from 530 gigawatts currently to 1,200 gigawatts by 2030. So those are very large targets. In the US, we have a new president. And President Biden, of course, has already brought the US back into the Paris Agreement, and it is in the process of updating the United States climate commitments under the Paris Agreement from the current 26 to 28% target by 2025. It will be hosting a climate summit of major economies on Earth Day on April 22nd, when we might expect to see some more climate announcements. The kind of things that are under consideration by the US now are targets as high as a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 2005. That would be a very ambitious target, quite an increase, but also roughly in line with the EU's target to cut its emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990. These are ambitious targets, but that's where we need to go if we're all going to get to zero in the next few decades. We have just an hour, so I want to get right into it. Let me start with Ma Jun. China's new 2030, 2060 carbon peaking and carbon neutrality targets. They've really set off a flurry of responses from within China, whether that's companies, national agencies, or local city and provincial governments. So could you tell us a little bit about what that response has looked like from within China, how these companies or local governments, for example, that you engage with are looking at carbon peaking and carbon neutrality?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Alvin, and hello, everyone. And it's such an honor to be invited by China Institute, by Dinda and James, and to be moderated by you and by, to have this dialogue with Professor Sachs, and really appreciate that. And to your question, I think, this pledge, as you said, have created a whole new dynamic in China. I think before this pledge was made last September, I would say that China has achieved some progress in terms of tackling the climate change. For example, our coal consumption used to be tripled in just 11, 12 years of time, have been brought to a halt. That expansion, but that's very much a side effect of China's massive clean air action plan. The climate work has lost its momentum before this pledge. I think, was made, I think externally, we all know the US, Trump administration has withdrawn at that time from the Paris Agreement, undermine the global solidarity and taking away whatever pressure, international pressure we used to be under. And internally, it's even more serious because of the first the slowing down of the economy, and then the trade war, and then the hit from the devastating pandemic. All this has made many local regions want to go back to the old way to jumpstart their economy, so we have seen the rebound of the of our iron, steel, and other energy intensive industries, and then the rebound of the coal consumption, the rise of the carbon emission, and I would say that this pledge has come at a critical moment, especially when China was at that time reviewing the draft of the 14th five-year plan. So almost like in an emergency way, climate targets have to be integrated into this this mega planning, and some of the target you have just cited, and then the whole different during the past several months in a flurry, we have seen the different government ministries and regulators and agencies try to craft out their own policy in response, and then followed by the local regions, Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangdong. They all have to craft their own response as well, and then followed by the largest state-owned enterprises from the coal industry, from the power industry, from the oil and chemical industries. So I think this is it has created a whole new dynamic, but because people view this as a political priority, so they have to make at this moment take a political stance on that. That being said, the solid action plans has yet to come, because everyone more or less got caught unexpectedly by this 20, 30, 60 kind of commitment. And now the learning curve is quite steep, and a lot of capacity building and preparation have to be made. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Majin. Professor Sachs, let me get your perspective. You've worked for many years with the United Nations, with many other international institutions, and with US policymakers. How did you view the China 2030, 2060 announcements in that line, and the impact within the US or internationally? You're on mute, just 1 second.
The most famous sentence in the world, "You are on mute." So I'm off mute now. And I want to thank the China Institute and all the participants, and a pleasure to be with Ma Zheng and with you, Alvin. Let me start just with one brief perspective on this. 2020 was tied with 2016 as the warmest year on record. We are already approximately 1.25 degrees Celsius warmer than the pre-industrial level. What was alarming, in addition, about 2020 is that it was a La Nina year, whereas 2016 was an El Nino year. And El Ninos tend to be warmer, La Ninas tend to be cooler. So the fact that we had a tie for the warmest year on record in a La Nina phase means that we are really blowing through temperature increases at an absolutely alarming rate. My colleague James Hansen, the world leading climatologist, thinks that we have an acceleration of warming to perhaps 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade, increased from about 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade in the past. To stay below 1.5 degrees C is getting extraordinarily difficult, even though it is essential for global safety. We may overshoot 1.5 degrees C quite soon, and then look at that as a target to get below again before the end of the 21st century. We're really far along in danger. And of course, we see the climate shocks everywhere. So this is no game. This is unbelievable delay. Of course, when President Xi made the announcement at the UN General Assembly, we still had President Trump as president. He was by far the most reckless leader in the world on this issue. He had pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He spoke nonsense about climate change, just like he talked trash and nonsense about COVID-19. So we were in the grips of anti-science. We were in the grips of corruption. We were in the grips of a psychopath, as far as I'm concerned. And when President Xi made the statement, it was, my God, what a great message, because the United States was going in the opposite direction and China was showing real leadership. What's notable is that even before President Biden came in, we had commitments by the European Union for 0 by 2050, Japan 0 by 2050, Korea 0 by 2050, China 0 by 2060, and UK 0 by 2050. Now, President Biden is on the same path, thank God, and is going to lead a very serious effort towards decarbonization. So we're in a much better situation than we were just a few months ago in terms of global understanding of this issue. The real goal is that by the time we have the Glasgow COP26 of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the first 2 weeks of November this year, every part of the world should be 0 by 2050. And I do want to say, I think China, which is so good at this stuff, should also be 0 by 2050, not 0 by 2060. It was a great advance, but I want to continue to nudge China even faster, because China is setting the pace at reducing the costs of photovoltaics, wind turbines, building the most remarkable wind turbine technologies, long distance transmission of renewable energy, electric vehicles. So China is so good at this that we really need every part of the world to reach 0 by 2050. But President Xi's announcement was extremely important. President Biden's election is extremely important. The last part we're going to talk about it is the United States and China need to cooperate now, because there's so much to do together. And here I'm again worried about the United States, because our politicians, I don't know if they know how to cooperate anymore or not, but they're not in a cooperative mood. China's saying, let's cooperate. The United States is instead insulting China. So that doesn't make much sense to me. I'm hoping that we recognize this common purpose, common mission, and that we cooperate together to speed the process, because we're really at the end of this story of safety, maybe beyond it already, and we've got to move fast.
Thank you, Professor Sachs, for that. That really bringing us to the present, the real challenges we face. Can I ask you both, what are some of the things that you think are the most important things that these two key countries could be doing to accelerate this race to zero, get their companies, get their local governments to be investing in this low carbon future? Maybe starting with you, Professor Sachs, and then Madrin.
When you actually look at scenarios all over the world, I've been doing this for a decade, looking at deep decarbonization pathways. They all pretty much look the same in terms of the basic message. The basic message is that our economies have to go to pretty much as electric as possible. That's the starting point. So we need to go to electric vehicles, electric transport. Of course, rail is already basically electric, or could easily be, but also for light duty vehicles. We need to go to electric for buildings. Of course, it's electric for the appliances in the buildings, and it's electric for the cooling, but we need to heat with electricity also instead of heating oil or natural gas. We need to go electric for as much of industry as is possible. A lot of industry, metallurgy, can go at least partly electric. There still are some question marks. And for some of the heavy industry that can't really go electric, we can go to zero carbon fuels, especially hydrogen, that you make with zero carbon electricity. So pretty much all scenarios say decarbonize the power supply, decarbonize the electricity generation, that is, electrify vehicles, electrify buildings, electrify part of industry, and for the parts you can't, shift to non-carbon fuels like hydrogen or other green fuels, because you can use renewable energy. Chemists can, I shouldn't say we, but chemists know how to use renewable energy to make green methane, synthetic liquids, synthetic hydrocarbons, hydrogen for direct combustion or for fuel cells. So the technology pathways are pretty good. There are some question marks. Aviation, exactly what to do. Is that advanced biofuels? Will it be electricity for short haul flights? Of course, there are uncertainties, but the basic transformation is known. So what do you do about that? Well, the first thing, stop building coal-fired power plants. This China should do, because China's still building coal-fired power plants. Stop, no more. We don't need any more coal-fired power plants. The United States has basically stopped, and thanks goodness our coal industry is basically shut down, except Trump was still trying to export coal. We need to go to zero. And that is quite important. And this basic sense, don't license new power generation except zero carbon. And I believe we should say by 2030, no later than 2035, don't try to sell an internal combustion engine car in the marketplace. You know, the big producers are already saying, GM is saying, no, okay, we're getting to all electric fleets. Most of the big producers are saying that. I think we should have a clear regulation. After a certain date, I'd say 2030, maybe some people would say, no, we can't quite do it then, do it by 2035. No more internal combustion vehicles. China is quite good at this regulatory approach. It's quite good at these technologies. The United States, we talk a lot about carbon pricing. Actually, China's going for carbon pricing and carbon taxes also. I don't quite understand that, because I would basically rather go to just regulation to say stop. But the main point that I'm making is the technology pathways, except for maybe 20%, are pretty clear right now. And the other 20%, even if it's 25%, they're not a huge mystery. It's just uncertain exactly which way we're going to come down. But there's nothing in what we need to do that isn't basically understood, because we're not talking about completely new energy sources like fusion or completely unproved technologies. We're basically talking about things that we already know how to do with some practical question marks, and we have to get on with doing it. And the problem is, you know, inertia plays a big role in politics. China has a big coal lobby. We have a big oil and gas lobby. And we have to take the decision that it's better to save the planet than to appease the lobby. So I think that that's the main story.
Thank you, Professor Sachs, for that. Ma-Jun.
Yeah, thank you. I very much agree with what Professor Sachs has laid out. You know, the decarbonize the power supply and the energy supply, and then try to go electrification. And so we need a transformation of all the, you know, our industries, our energy mix, and transportation, and green our buildings. I mean, all these are necessary. That being said, the investment going to be tremendous. According to the initial calculation, it will reach some over 130 trillion yuan, RMB, for us to try to, we need to invest to achieve carbon neutrality. So this money, the central government can only invest on limited part of that. And then, so the local government have to take their action, and then the companies have to be willing to, increase their spending, invest on their green future. So how to achieve that? I think first and foremost, we need to, in China, it's very important to try to eliminate this policy uncertainties. So that's, again, what President Xi's commitment can do. He reiterated that 6-7 times after the UN meeting. So make everyone understand that this is a political priority and there's no return. We have to go down this path. And so this is a clear message to be sent in China. And then, how to distribute this 40-year long commitment into phases, setting short-term, mid-term milestones, and then distribute the obligation to different regions in China, to the provinces and cities, so that they can be held accountable, because some of them still want to grow their way out of the current economic woo. So that's why, we are partnering with agencies, with professional researchers to develop the carbon peak and neutrality index for provinces and for cities. So that, and then, on the private industry, I think, regulatory requirement is very important. And in the meantime, everyone need to be able to figure out the return on investment. So how to set their expectations on the carbon price. Professor Sachs mentioned about this pricing issue. There are two ways. You either levy carbon tax or you have a cap and treat market. And China tend to choose the carbon market, but without, over the past 7-8 years, the trial operation was not very, very successful. So we have a lot to learn, all these lessons, learn from our own lessons, from the lessons in Europe, and this is very important. And so that's why, the 14th five-year plan, how to set a clearer targets so that the total cap could be clearer, and there will be clearer expectations from not just the companies who are going to invest, but also the banks, and the investors. So that's also important. I think last but not least, to make all these market-based solutions functioning, we have to have an accountability system. We have to have transparency. And with all the progress made on China's environmental transparency, the carbon disclosure still is very limited. So how to promote, the companies to calculate and disclose, measure and disclose their carbon footprint. I think that also matters a lot in our country. And last point, I think China and US, if can work together, that will be very, very helpful, because, that can also help to eliminate some of the uncertainties. If we have a new president, later on, in America, who choose the other path, then people are gonna concern that this will again have an impact. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Majin. I guess what I'm hearing from both of you is that regulation is really important. If you can just say no more ICE vehicles by 2030, no more coal power plants now, that basically puts you in the right direction. I think in the longer term, China is looking at what the EU has done with carbon markets and wondering if they can build a carbon market that really prices carbon and that is used to shift investment decisions. Of course, building a really effective carbon market with the clear emissions, what we call MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification, and mechanisms for ensuring a stable carbon price, it takes time. And so I think that regulation in the short term is still a really important tool that policymakers need to keep in the toolkit. What are the kinds of things that you see the US and China being able to cooperate on? The two countries have announced recently that they will be co-chairs of the G20 Green Finance Working Group. Are there other ways that you see, both of these key countries that are, I think, really moving in the same direction in a lot of these ways? And in terms of what Jeff was talking about with technology development, I think we are all moving in that same direction. What are the ways that these two countries could work together most productively?
These are two giant economies, and of course, two superpowers, and so they better work together rather than face conflicts on many fronts. And we have a lot of issues now between the two countries on, of course, military issues, technology issues, industrial policy issues, trade issues. It's a pretty full agenda, and it's gotten bad actually in the last couple of years because the U.S. has taken a very aggressive rhetorical, not just rhetorical, trade attack on China, including really trying to bring down big Chinese companies like Huawei, which I personally really resent and think it's obnoxious because we should have not the view that it's us versus China, but rather have the view that we're going to compete on a market basis. We're going to compete on WTO rules. We're not going to try to bankrupt even a major company abroad. I find it obnoxious also that the U.S. put out an arrest warrant for a senior executive of Huawei. It's just, in my view, provocative, rather disgusting. But the U.S. is in a kind of state of anguish because of China's technology success. That's what this is really all about. China got first to 5G, and the United States didn't have any producers that could produce 5G to compete with Huawei. So the US said, oh my God, we've got to try to kill Huawei. And then went around to all the allies and said, you can't buy Huawei equipment. It's too dangerous, based on no evidence, nothing, not one shred of evidence actually that was presented. So I think we're far from cooperation right now. We don't even have decent civil exchange of views. So what I would recommend is proper dialogue between the two countries at a serious level, at a high level, mutual dialogue about these climate issues, mutual dialogue about the trade issues, mutual dialogue about the international finance issues, because this cannot, and I think one thing we should learn from Trump, leaders should not tweet, period. Get off of Twitter. Foreign policy is far too serious to have this kind of game. Chinese-US relations should not be reduced to certainly not 140 US characters, not even 140 Chinese characters, which contain a lot more information than 140 US characters. We should not be doing this by Twitter. We should be doing this by serious, detailed discussion. Track 1 by governments, and track 2, because Ma Jun and I could talk, and we could each have experts, and we could have a detailed, serious discussion about issues. So we should be proposing standards, timelines, proper behavior on what are we going to do about 5G? What are we going to do about definitions and standards for electric vehicles? What timelines will we phase out these things? How do we agree on standards for long distance, high voltage transmission? Because China produces some great technology in long distance transmission. And we need that technology, by the way, all over the world, because renewable energy doesn't necessarily come in the cities where you need it. You have to bring it in, like China's bringing in wind and solar and hydro from Western China. So these are areas where serious discussion should take place. Also, the rare earths and how to make global supply chains of batteries, for example, that are not going to lead to conflict between our countries, that are going to enable industries to take shape in the US, in Europe, in China, in other countries that want these industries. There's a lot to talk about. But right now, the US attitude is don't talk, just make public relations statements. And then China responds with public relations statements. This is no way for the two most important countries in the world to be acting. You can't do this by spokesmen. You do this by meeting, like we're meeting. They should be meeting frequently and having serious discussions. So that's my main recommendation, is get back to the discussion table. Serious people, serious discussions.
And that working level of cooperation on energy transition, those of us in this field, we've seen that over the years between the US and China. Excellent cooperation on really important issues like the grid, like low carbon buildings, all of those. We do want to see those continue in the future. It's very important. Ma-Jun.
Yeah, I very much agree with Professor Sachs on his, I mean, particularly on this point of this hackless tweet. I was once invited by the U.S. Previous U.S. former U.S. ambassador to China, to attend a meeting, to give a talk in Tianjin, but in the morning, suddenly, the Chinese on the Chinese side, the vice mayor would not show up because a tweet was made by by President Trump, just overnight, and so a environmental discussion was just have to be scaled down because of that, and so I think it's so important for these two countries, the two largest economies, two largest emitters, to really share this global responsibility on this issue. I think with new President Biden, he brings a lot of hope on this issue. He's so progressively minded on the carbon climate issue, and of course today, before, I think the proactive collaboration between the two countries paved the way for the signing of the Paris Agreement. And today, the geopolitical situation was very different from that time. So bilaterally, probably it wouldn't be easy between government and government. But we can start first from the multilateral process. I hope that all this discussion on green finance and investment could go back to normal in the G20 meeting. Before, it was made impossible because Trump administration would not allow its representative to even get involved in any discussion about green financing and in the international multilateral process. And bilaterally, I think I very much share the view of Professor Sachs that we can start it from the second, third track. To me, greening the supply chain between our two countries, between the green our investment, that can be done. So many leading American companies, from Apple to Dell to Microsoft to Nike to Levi's, to P&G, they're all basically tap into the environmental data we gathered and use that to green their supply chain in China. So this is can be done. And investment, I think there's so much data now available in China. So if they choose, they can do it. And then between researchers, between the NGOs, the U.S. foundations have been so much supportive. Energy Foundation and Rockefeller Brothers Fund and many foundations in America, Skoll Foundation, all supportive to this. And well, we hope that this can be expanded. Thank you.
Thank you, Madrin. Let me ask one final question from my side, which was just about what you just mentioned, environmental pollution data in China. Since 2008, China has required companies to be releasing pollution information data. Your organization, Institute for Public Environmental Affairs, has done an amazing job to make this data more widely available. Besides the air pollution and water pollution data, you said that carbon pollution data now is also becoming more prevalent, but still rather early. What role do you see in terms of, in the future, carbon pollution data being a requirement for companies to disclose this to the public, to the government, and then having that pollution data, that carbon pollution data be used for getting companies to be changing their investment decisions or getting banks to be changing their financing decisions?
Yeah, thank you. We started from the very basic, 2006. That year, we can only compile less than 2,000 records of violations. But after 10 years, more than 10 years of index making and assessment of 120 cities, today we have witnessed an historic progress made. Today, that violation records number it's approaching 2 million. And every day, because of the innovative online monitoring being made public, every day we can compile some 3 million emission data into our database. And based on that, we have created a dynamic environmental credit assessment tool. And this rating system, I'm happy to report, have been for the first time adopted by major Chinese banks. Postal Bank, the 5th largest state-owned banks in China, have decided to use our system to go through 70,000 companies who want to borrow money during the pandemic. It was very hard to be on the ground, so they used the big data to screen them and drive those who rated red and above to go through our disclosure and validation process. So I think it started from the local environment pollution control, and now it's time to try to extend that into the carbon side. So we have to learn from the local, successful stories, from the local pollution control, and try to, drive the carbon emitters, the major emitters, to first calculate and then measure and report, measure, verification, reporting, and then set target and try to cut emission. And with that, the basic, know-how is being developed. We work along with our partners to develop a carbon footprint accounting system, integrate all these formulas and the carbon intensity of different power grids in China. So that I would say the infrastructure is being made. I hope the government can clarify and require the carbon disclosure. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
I've appeared on the screen because I think it would be a great time for us to take some questions from the audience. But I do want to just jump in with one thought about that, which is about sort of the narrative that Americans have about China. And what you just described, Majun, is really kind of incredible, that there's, because of the introduction of this green finance system and the fact that the government is pushing and promoting green finance, that means that the major banks in China are now demanding data about environmental performance from companies all across the country. And I think that we Americans just don't understand the extent to which the government is really pushing this kind of greenification of the economy.
Yeah, that's very much so in China. This is also, green finance policy have been promoted over the past 5 years. We have, as an NGO, have been made a member of the Green Finance Committee because of our data, and now our data being introduced on the committee's platform. And I would say only during the past 1 year we have seen the banks seriously want to tap into all this very, facility level of data that demonstrate that they want to go more solid on this. It will be a powerful leverage because, this greening of the investment could really be a great motivation.
So I see.
I think there's one more thing I would add about U.S. Misunderstanding about the China situation, which is that China is the biggest emitter of CO2 in the world, about 28%. And so Americans say, oh, look at China, they're doing this. But on a per capita basis, China is half of what the United States is emitting. We're emitting 15 tons of CO2 per American. In China, it's 7 tons per Chinese. So it's half, but China has 4 times the population of the United States. So that leads to twice the total emissions, but half the emissions per person. And so both of us we got to clean up both. There's not a matter of pointing fingers at one or the other. And the United States is much more emitting per person. We've just gone 20 years not really doing much except at the very local level because our federal government has been paralyzed by the oil lobby. And so we have to understand that whatever we say about China, double it, because that's what we're doing in per capita terms in the United States.
So I see a question from Arthur Kroeber, who's a well-known China economist, and Arthur is asking, instead of aiming for climate cooperation between the United States and China, which in the current political environment is almost impossible because any technological progress in China is seen as a national security threat in Washington, wouldn't it be better to focus on ways of making US-China competition a positive force for climate, a race to the top, so to speak?
Might I say a word about that? I think that there's one element of that is going to happen, and I think both countries should understand it, and that is the US will go down this road, but it's going to say, we want to produce a lot of this stuff. And so there will be a Buy America attitude towards, say, photovoltaics or wind turbines or electric vehicles and batteries and so on. So in this sense, I think we're going to end up with supply chains that have more American components in the U.S. market, and it's going to be part of American industrial policy to put Americans to work doing this stuff. I think that can be done in a mutual understanding and collaborative way. And so in a sense, that's a race by each one. Who's going to produce the electric vehicles for world markets in the future? That part is okay. But what I don't want to accept in Arthur's wise question is that we take as given this political view, because the American security establishment's really neurotic. It just cannot face the fact that China is successful. And we have to get over that, because it is not our goal it should not be our goal that China is not successful. It should be our goal that China is successful and we're cooperating peacefully. That's our goal, as far as I'm concerned. So we have to grow up in the American foreign policy establishment and stop seeing the world as a zero-sum game. And we're not there right now, of course, but we need to get there. We can't settle for the idea that it's just competition. It really needs to be cooperation. And Americans need to get over the fact that China is a successful country and should be a successful country and is going to be a successful country. And that is not a detriment to our security. That's good for our security. We are more secure with China being successful, for sure. And every technology can have a military role or not. So this idea that every technology is therefore dangerous is absurd. And that is an American neurosis that we have to get over, because we should not be stopping the sharing of science, the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of technology, the trade in technology, even trying to stop Chinese students from studying in American universities. This is a terrible idea. So this is what we really need to also direct our attention at, to stop this zero-sum mentality. But it's much worse on the American side right now.
Yep, I appreciate the point made by Professor Sachs, and I agree with the professor that if we can, at least have a healthy competition, in this race towards zero, that will be very helpful. But to have a fair competition, you have to have fair rules, and to create standards and criteria to try to level the playing field. So if each side can go more open and more transparent and more data-driven, and then there's a chance for us to really achieve that healthy competition. And I'm very glad to see some of the, we're partnering with some of the leading brands from America, like Apple, like Dell, in a working group, to try to share their insights and experience in, for example, setting their own life cycle product, carbon neutral, zero carbon, methodology, and to motivate more Chinese brands to follow suit, including Huawei. Fantastic. And I think that this is something that probably going to only add some cost. It will not really make you commercially more competitive, at least at this moment. But this know-how, eventually could be so much helpful to level the playing field. And I hope this could serve as the basis. Thank you.
And Majin, are you seeing Chinese companies starting to, perhaps because of pressure from the government, starting to, worry more about their environmental performance?
For sure, it's first coming from the government side. They see that this is going to be the policy direction to go, and they have to adapt to that. And then it also comes from the market incentives. On the finance side, on the if you want to go listing, and eventually your insurance and your green bond, everything will be tied to that eventually. And then the international trade is also a major factor. If the rest of the world go green, and we could be left behind, and it could be subject to border adjustment tax and all of this disruption of the trade relations. And last but not least, from the NGOs, from the public, we are now reading all this thousands of listed companies, and give a color code to some more than 5 million companies in China. Put them on digital map, allow people to view that on the cell phone, and make reporting of their bad behavior. And I think all of this eventually, I hope, can create an accountability system.
What a great idea, by the way. And also, I'm just thinking how clever that is, because China really used the phone apps very well for the COVID control, to have, the red, yellow, green, and so on COVID. But somebody's got to come up with the app where you just take your phone and you hold it over a product before you buy it in the supermarket, and you have immediately, oh, I shouldn't buy that one. They've not subscribed, they're not reporting, and so forth. And I'm sure that some Chinese app writer is going to come up with that. But this is a really great idea.
Yeah, Professor Sachs, if you
maybe you already have it.
No, we haven't come up to that level, but now there is a service on our Blue Map app that if you pay attention to any companies that you're interested in, if they have problems, you got a push notification on your cell phone. And
wow.
Some of the brands have decided to put their own logo on the site of the supplier in China. More than a dozen of them on our website, a Blue Map website.
Okay, fantastic.
Any citizen can view that. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a question from Jeffrey Tao in the audience who's asking, a question about EVs. Do you think GM's lead in going electric will be followed by other Detroit automakers? And does the US have the electric charging infrastructure to support it? I guess I'd put that in a broader context. So you can each comment, like, how big a deal is China is so far out in the lead in terms of EVs right now. How big a deal is it, Professor Sachs, that the Americans are now kind of, getting religion on EVs?
Well, EVs are coming because they're better cars. So they're not just cleaner, but they're actually better cars. Anyone that's been in a Tesla during the last 5 years knows that they're just more fun. They're better, they're more interesting, they do more things. And they're going to be self-driving to an important extent sometime in the next 10 to 20 years, I'm sure, which is much harder to do, maybe just not feasible with internal combustion engines. So the EVs are coming for sure. I think President Biden's new program, which he'll introduce after this rescue package, it will be an infrastructure package, it should, and I think it probably will, have a big focus on charging stations, on electrification along the interstate highway system. And there is a major consideration about the battery supply chains. There's a global issue also, because a lot of the rare earths and some of the critical components are in developing countries where we also need environmental and social standards really applied. Can you imagine, cobalt, which is so vital, is of course a major product of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it could be a phenomenal source of economic development for that country, and should be. And we should be helping to make sure that it's not children in the supply chains, and it's not child labor, and it's not environmentally destructive, but actually a core part of sustainable development for a country that has been so badly abused in history, but now has a chance to play a leading role in the global supply chain for this whole industry. So there's a lot, again, that we could do together, because if China and the US both said to the DRC, we're going to help to make sure that this vital mineral supply that we get from you is good for your development, that we're not going to have rapacious companies abusing your country, but we're actually going to not only help to make sure that that works, but that it really serves your economic development. This would be a huge kind of cooperation that really could be done. I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that. And this is the kind of creative thing that we're going to need to make the EVs be available, because it's hundreds of millions that are going to be sold over the next 20 years. And we need supply chains for that. We need production systems for that.
Our second program in this series on getting to zero is going to be about EVs on April 6th. So I hope that everybody
Fantastic.
will.
Yeah.
So we're just about at time now, but I'm going to just grab the opportunity to ask you both one final question, which is, I'd like you both to talk about, Jeff, what is the one thing that you wish, Americans knew, Chinese understood about America, that you feel they don't understand about America? And Ma Jun, what is the one thing that you wish Americans understood about China that they don't seem to understand?
Well, I want Chinese to know that we're not all crazy, and we're not all Trumpists and so forth. And but actually, I just want to answer Ma Jun's question before he gives a better answer. I want Americans to understand China much more. Thank you to the China Institute. We really need. Americans need to know some geography. They need to know some history. They need to have some perspective. And we're not good at any of those things right now. So I think that if both sides understood better, but I especially want Americans to understand about China. Mm-hmm. Phenomenal civilization, phenomenal country, and one where we should be rooting all for success. And stop the bad mouthing. And I think the more one knows, the more you come to that conclusion. So this is really a matter of good public understanding. And I want us to do our homework in the United States, but I especially want to salute what you're doing, Dinda, and what the Institute is doing, because this is exactly what we need. We need to tone it down. We need to understand. By the way, we need young people connected by Zoom, not just us, but we should have high school students talking with each other, doing joint projects. Maybe if high school students on both sides did joint projects on decarbonization, they'd come up with better answers than we would. So I think that this is the kind of thing we should be promoting.
And Ma Jun, what do you think? You spent a bunch of time in the States as well. What do you wish that Chinese better understood about America?
Yeah, I really have to join the Professor Sachs, and I have to say Professor Sachs give the best answer to the question. It's such an amazing answer, and I want to join him to salute what you and James are doing. The China Institute by bridging this gap of distrust in such a difficult moment. I hope the Americans can understand that the environmental issue is a very, very unique, special aspect in China. So much consensus have been built because this matters not just in a vague way, to the destiny of the mankind, but in a very, very solid way to the health of our people, of our ecosystem. This morning is the third morning of smoggy days in Beijing. We have made such a progress, but still, the mission have far from being accomplished. So because of this, in China, there's a serious efforts, serious aspiration and efforts made in China, and on the one thing is very, very special. I guess most of the Americans are somewhat surprised when they got a chance to open our Blue Map app. They can see so much environmental data there. So that's the point. I hope they can understand. If they choose, they can actually motivate the brands in America to vastly green their supply chain. By the way, we sent a letter just a couple of weeks to Tesla, reminding them of a failing, polluting Chinese supplier. We haven't got our response. So back to your question, how to green this supply chain, eventually. And I think now there's a much better chance. And then green the investment, they can consume, they basically, if they choose, they can eventually, go real green consumption, not just the last process, but the whole life cycle of the product, because of this, when China is getting more transparent on the environmental side, there's a chance for the other parts of the world, to come together to create this global, database and accountability system. I hope they can understand this point, and I hope the two countries can really join hands. Each of us can make our own efforts and progress, but together, we can go further and faster. Thank you.
Wow. Well, we just really want to salute all three of you. We certainly want to be rooting for mutual success. And, we at China Institute, as you've said, we're certainly trying to bridge the gap of distrust. But I just really want to salute the three of you for working so hard on all of our behalf to save this planet and to improve mutual understanding. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We've all learned a lot, and we hope we can get you back again. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, thank you, Alvin. Thank you, Dinda.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Thank
see
you.
you. Bye-bye.